My name is Hannah Cole. I am 29 years old and I have spent most of my life standing just outside my family's photographs. Sometimes I was the one holding the camera. Other times, someone asked me to fetch another chair, straighten a collar, or move a handbag out of sight. By the time I returned, the picture had already been taken. That Easter Sunday, they did not even bother inventing an excuse. My mother had told me lunch would begin at noon. I arrived at 11:45 carrying a glass dish of roasted potatoes, still warm beneath the foil. Cars filled the driveway of my parents' house in Willow Creek, and pastel balloons moved gently beside the porch. When I stepped into the backyard, 17 members of my family were climbing down from a white wooden platform decorated with spring flowers. My younger sister Chloe stood beside a professional photographer, checking images on his camera. "You already took the family picture?" I asked. Chloe glanced at the clock on her phone. "Oh, Mom thought she told you to come at 11. She told me noon." Well, the photographer had another booking. Everyone wore matching shades of pale green and cream. I looked down at my navy dress. No one had told me about the colors either. My mother, Patricia, walked over and took the potato dish from my hands. "Don't make this into something uncomfortable, Hannah," she whispered. "Grandma has been tired all morning." As usual, my grandmother became the reason I was expected to remain silent. Grandma Evelyn was 86 and lived in the downstairs guest room after a stroke had weakened her left side. I was a community nurse, so I managed her prescriptions, hospital appointments, blood pressure records, and physiotherapy schedule. Leaving my family would also mean leaving her care to people who forgot whether she had taken her evening tablets. So I smiled. Smiling was the role I had been given in that house. I carried serving bowls outside, refilled drinks, sliced the lamb when my father's wrist started aching, and listened while Chloe described the engagement party she planned to hold in September. Nobody mentioned the photograph again. That evening, I returned to my small apartment and found Chloe's Easter post on social media. The caption read, "Nothing matters more than having the whole family together." I stared at the image. My uncles stood behind the chairs. My cousins leaned close together. Even Chloe's fiancé's parents were included. Grandma Evelyn sat in the center beneath an arch of artificial flowers. There was no sign that I had ever been there. I was about to close the app when a new comment appeared beneath the photograph. It came from an account named Miriam Hale, with a profile picture of a white rose. The comment said, "Where is Margaret's daughter?" I read it twice. My mother's name was Patricia. My grandmother was Evelyn. There was no Margaret in our family. Before I could take a screenshot, the comment disappeared. Then the entire post vanished. I checked the time. Less than 1 minute had passed. My sister had deleted a carefully staged family photograph almost immediately, after a stranger mentioned a woman I had never heard of. I called Chloe first. She rejected the call. I called my mother. She answered on the sixth ring. "Did Chloe remove the Easter picture?" I asked. The photographer used an unflattering angle. Someone left a strange comment. Silence filled the line. I could hear movement in the background, a cupboard closing, my father's voice becoming quiet. The woman asked where Margaret's daughter was. I continued, "Who is Margaret?" My mother's response came slowly. "People write nonsense online." She deleted the photograph within seconds. "Some photographs should remain private, Hannah." "It was already public." "That is enough." Her voice had changed. My mother was normally controlled even during arguments, but now each word sounded tightened by fear. Before hanging up, she added, "Do not contact that woman." I stood alone in my kitchen, still holding my phone. I had never said I knew who the woman was. At 12:18 that night, a message request appeared. It was from Miriam Hale. Her message contained only 4 sentences. "I worked at St. Agnes Hospital when you were born. The woman who raised you told everyone her baby had died. I believed her for 29 years. Tonight, I saw your face." My knees weakened and I sat down on the kitchen floor. There was one detail Miriam Hale could not possibly have known. St. Agnes Hospital was where I had spent 6 weeks when I was 9 years old, fighting a severe infection. And during one fever-filled night, I remembered hearing two women arguing outside my room. One voice belonged to my mother. The other woman kept saying the same name. Margaret. Until that moment, I had believed it was only a dream. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the kitchen floor with Miriam Hale's message open on my phone, reading the same 4 sentences until they stopped looking like words. The woman who raised you told everyone her baby had died. My first instinct was to reject it. My mother was cold sometimes, controlling often, but she was still the woman who had packed my school lunches, taken me to appointments, and sat beside my bed when I was sick. Then I remembered the Easter photograph disappearing. I remembered her warning, "Do not contact that woman." At 2 in the morning, I replied, "How do you know who I am?" Miriam answered almost immediately. "Because you have Margaret's eyes." I stared at the message. "Who is Margaret?" This time, several minutes passed. "Your birth mother." My hands went numb. I checked Miriam's profile. She appeared to be in her late 60s. Most of her photographs showed gardening, church events, grandchildren, and a small brown dog. Her account went back more than 10 years. Nothing looked recently created. I searched her name online. Miriam Hale had worked as a registered nurse at St. Agnes Hospital for 34 years. A local newspaper article from her retirement described her as a former maternity and pediatric nurse. She was real. That made everything worse. I asked her to explain. She refused to do it through messages. "There are records you need to see. Meet me somewhere public. Bring your birth certificate." The next morning, I took my birth certificate from the metal box where I kept passports, insurance papers, and nursing documents. I had seen it many times without actually looking at it. Name: Hannah Rose Cole. Date of birth: June 17th. Mother: Patricia Cole. Father: David Cole. Near the bottom, in smaller print, were 2 words I had never questioned: delayed registration. The certificate had been filed almost 11 months after my reported birth. I sat at the table and traced the words with my finger. Why would parents wait nearly a year to register their child? Later that afternoon, I drove to my parents' house under the excuse of checking Grandma Evelyn's medication. My mother was attending a charity committee meeting. Chloe was at work. My father was repairing shelves in the garage. Grandma sat near the window with a blanket over her knees, watching birds at the feeder. After checking her blood pressure, I asked whether she wanted to look through old family albums. Her face brightened. "The blue ones are in the hall cupboard," she said. The albums were arranged by year in my mother's neat handwriting. I found the year of my birth. The album felt strangely light. Inside were photographs of Christmas decorations, my father painting the kitchen, Chloe's first birthday, and Grandma standing beside a flower bed. Then came several torn pages, not photographs removed from plastic sleeves. Entire pages had been ripped out. Only ragged paper remained near the binding. My pulse quickened. I carried the album into Grandma's room. "Do you know why these pages are missing?" She touched the cover with trembling fingers. Her expression changed. The softness disappeared from her face, replaced by something close to fear. "Margaret," she whispered. I sat beside her. "Grandma, who is Margaret?" She looked directly at me. For a moment her eyes became clear. "My youngest girl." I stopped breathing. My mother had always told me she had only one sister, Aunt Denise. Where is she now? Grandma's mouth tightened. "Gone." "Gone where?" She shook her head. "Patricia said it was better." "What was better?" Grandma looked toward the doorway as though expecting someone to appear. Then she reached for my wrist. "You were such a beautiful baby," she said. The sentence struck me harder than anything Miriam had written. My grandmother had never talked about my infancy. There were no newborn photographs of me, no hospital stories, no baby bracelet saved in a box. My earliest photograph showed me standing beside a picnic table, already old enough to walk. "Did Margaret have a baby?" I asked. Grandma's fingers tightened around mine. "She wanted to keep you." Before I could ask anything else, the garage door opened. My father stepped into the hallway. He saw the album on my lap and stopped. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Then he crossed the room, took the album from my hands, and closed it. "You should not upset your grandmother," he said. "I asked her about Margaret." His face drained of color. "Who told you that name?" "A woman named Miriam Hale." The album slipped slightly in his grip. That small movement told me more than words. He knew her. I stood. "Dad, am I adopted?" He looked at Grandma, then toward the front door. Finally, he said, You need to speak to your mother. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give. At that moment, my phone vibrated. A message from Miriam appeared. Saturday, 10 o'clock, Rosewood Cafe. Then another message followed. Hannah, prepare yourself. Patricia did not simply adopt you. She gave you the identity of a child who is already dead. Rosewood Cafe was almost empty when I arrived Saturday morning. Miriam Hale sat at a corner table with a leather folder in front of her. She stood when she saw me and stared at my face for several seconds. You look exactly like her, she said. Margaret? Miriam nodded. Up close, she looked older than her profile picture. Her silver hair was pinned neatly behind her head, and her hands had the dry, careful appearance of someone who had spent decades washing them between patients. We sat. I placed my birth certificate on the table. She read the words delayed registration and sighed. I was afraid of that. Tell me what happened. Miriam opened the folder but did not remove anything yet. She began with the year I was 9, when I had been admitted to St. Agnes Hospital with a severe infection. The records department had tried to connect my admission file with the hospital's birth records. The system rejected the request. There was already a Hannah Rose Cole in the records, she explained. Same parents, same address. I felt cold despite the warm cafe. What was wrong with the record? The child was listed as deceased. Miriam finally took out a photocopied document and turned it toward me. It was a death certificate. Baby girl Cole. Mother, Patricia Cole. Father, David Cole. Date of birth and death, May 29th. The name Hannah Rose had been written later in blue ink. My eyes moved over the page again and again. That was not me. No, Miriam said. It was Patricia's first daughter. My mother had given birth to a baby who died less than 3 weeks before the birthday written on my certificate. Miriam removed a second page. This one was a maternity ward log from the same hospital. Patient, Margaret Evelyn Bennett, age 17, delivered a healthy female child on June 2nd, infant discharged to family care. The signature beneath the release section belonged to my grandmother. I knew it immediately. She still wrote her capital E the same way on birthday cards. My grandmother took me? Yes. Why? Miriam folded her hands. Patricia had lost her daughter. Margaret was unmarried and terrified. Your grandmother believed one tragedy could solve another. I felt anger rise inside me. Margaret agreed to give me away? Miriam looked down. She refused at first. The cafe seemed to move farther away. She was exhausted after a difficult labor. Your grandmother and Patricia stayed with her for nearly 2 days. They told her she had disgraced the family. They said no respectable man would marry her if she returned home with a baby. Did she sign? Eventually. Miriam's voice became softer. She was 17, Hannah. She had been raised to obey them. I pressed my fingers against the table to stop them from shaking. Why did my parents tell the hospital their child had died? Because when the records office discovered the conflict during your childhood admission, Patricia said their first baby had died and that you were a relative's child they had adopted privately. That sounds close to the truth. Close enough to end questions, Miriam replied, but not enough to explain why your identity was built from the dead child's file. My official name belonged to a baby buried before I was born. My reported birthday had been chosen after the hospital closed the first child's records. What happened to Margaret? She left town soon after. Did she ever try to contact me? Miriam hesitated. Yes. The answer broke something in me. When? The night you were dangerously ill at 9. She came to the hospital. A memory returned instantly. 2 women arguing outside my room, my mother's voice sharp, another voice pleading. Margaret, I remember hearing them. She reached the hallway outside your room, Miriam said. Patricia refused to let her enter. What did my mother say? Miriam looked at me with the sympathy nurses reserve for news that cannot be softened. She told Margaret that she had lost the right to call herself your mother the day she signed the papers. I stared through the cafe window. Outside, people crossed the street carrying shopping bags and coffee cups, living ordinary Saturday mornings while mine split open. Miriam pushed the folder closer. There is one more place you need to go. An address was written on a slip of paper. St. Agnes Memorial Cemetery, Section D, Infant Row. That afternoon, I drove there alone. The infant graves were small and close together beneath maple trees. I walked slowly, reading names and dates until I found the stone. Hannah Rose Cole, May 29th, beloved daughter of Patricia and David. My name was carved into gray granite. I knelt and touched the letters. There were no flowers, but the grass around the grave had been carefully trimmed. My family had spent 29 years maintaining the grave of a dead daughter while treating the living one like someone who could be cropped from every frame. Standing there, I understood the truth. I had not been raised simply as an adopted child. I'd been brought home to fill an empty crib, and every time my mother looked at me, she saw both the daughter she had lost and the girl who could never truly replace her. For 3 days, I carried the photograph of the grave in my phone without opening it. I did not call my parents. I did not answer Chloe's messages asking whether I would attend Grandma Evelyn's birthday dinner. Instead, I returned to work, changing dressings, checking medications, and comforting strangers whose families were preparing to say goodbye. It amazed me how easily I could guide other people through grief while having no idea how to survive my own. On Thursday evening, I finally drove to my parents' house. The birthday dinner had already begun. The dining room looked exactly as it always had: white tablecloth, silver candlesticks, fresh lilies in the center, 12 place settings arranged with military precision. My place remained where it had always been, at the corner nearest the kitchen door. The easiest seat to leave, the easiest face to crop. No one mentioned the cemetery. No one mentioned Miriam Hale. Everyone behaved as though nothing had changed. During dessert, Chloe raised her phone. Family selfie! Automatically, I leaned toward Grandma Evelyn. Chloe shifted the phone slightly away from me. The movement lasted less than a second. No one else would have noticed. I did. So that's still the rule? I asked quietly. The room fell silent. What rule? Chloe replied. The one where I'm never supposed to be in the picture. She forced a laugh. Oh, Hannah, don't start. I'm asking a simple question. My mother placed her fork neatly beside her plate. This is your grandmother's birthday. So answer me. You are making everyone uncomfortable. I looked around the table. My father stared at his coffee. My uncles suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. Even Chloe refused to meet my eyes. They all knew. Every single person sitting there knew something I had been denied my entire life. I turned to my mother. I met Miriam Hale. For the first time in years, Patricia Cole lost control of her expression, only for a heartbeat. But I saw it. I've also been to St. Agnes Cemetery. No one moved. I found the grave. Grandma Evelyn slowly lowered her spoon. My mother's voice remained calm. You've been speaking to people who enjoy creating drama. I saw my own name carved into a headstone. It belonged to our first daughter. So why did you give me her name? Silence. Why did you give me her birthday? More silence. Finally, my father whispered, Patricia. She raised one hand without looking at him. I'll handle this. Handle, the same word Grandma Evelyn had used. Patricia folded her napkin before speaking. Yes, she said calmly. You were adopted. The sentence landed like a carefully rehearsed speech. Margaret was my younger sister. So Miriam told me the truth. You were family. That isn't what I asked. We took you in because no one else could. That's also not what I asked. My mother's jaw tightened. You should be grateful. The words hit harder than a slap. Grateful? You had a home. I lost my mother. You gained one. I lost my identity. You gained a family. I leaned forward. Then explain the grave. She looked directly into my eyes. The baby who died was my daughter. I know. My daughter. I know. My whole world ended. I know. And then Margaret came home carrying a healthy baby. Her voice cracked for the first time. Everyone expected me to smile. Nobody spoke. I had already painted the nursery. She swallowed hard. I had already bought clothes. Tears filled her eyes but never fell. I had already chosen the name Hannah. The room felt impossibly still. My mother said God had answered our prayers. She laughed once. It sounded empty. She said one child was gone and another needed a home. You could have raised me honestly. No. Her answer came instantly. The town would have destroyed Margaret. So you destroyed her instead. Patricia flinched, and then you erased her. I protected this family. You protected your reputation. I protected all of us. No, I said quietly, you protected yourself. For the first time, my father looked up. Hannah, I turned toward him. Did you know? His shoulders sagged. Yes. For 29 years? He nodded. You watched me search old albums. Another nod. You watched them tear pages out. He covered his face with one hand. I was weak. No. My voice remained calm. You made a choice. The words seemed to age him instantly. I loved you, he whispered. I believe you. Every day. I believe that too. But love without truth isn't enough. No one argued. No one defended themselves, because there was nothing left to defend. As I stood to leave, Grandma Evelyn suddenly reached for my hand. Her voice trembled. She came back. I froze. Who? Margaret. When? When you were 9, my grandmother began crying softly. She stood outside your hospital room, exactly as Miriam had said. I told Patricia to let her in. What happened? Grandma closed her eyes. Patricia said, her voice broke. She said Margaret had already buried her daughter once. I walked out before anyone could stop me. Outside, the evening air felt cold against my face. Halfway to my car, my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. The message contained only one sentence. This is Margaret. If you're ready, I'd like to meet my daughter. I stared at the message for almost 5 minutes before replying, I'm ready. Her answer came less than a minute later. Tomorrow, 11 o'clock, Riverside Botanical Garden. I'll be waiting by the old fountain. That night, I barely slept. For 29 years, I had imagined every possible version of my birth mother. Sometimes she had abandoned me. Sometimes she had forgotten me. Sometimes she had never wanted me. Now I knew none of those stories were true. She had lost me. There was a difference. The garden was almost empty the next morning. Spring flowers lined the stone pathways, and the sound of water echoed from the old fountain in the center. A woman stood beside it wearing a light blue coat. She looked nervous enough to leave at any second. When she turned toward me, I forgot how to breathe. Looking at her felt like looking into the future. She had my eyes, the same smile. Even the small scar above my left eyebrow existed on the opposite side of her face. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, Hannah? I nodded. She covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. I've imagined this day for 29 years. So have I. She walked toward me slowly, almost afraid I might disappear. When she finally reached me, she stopped. May I hug you? It was the first time anyone had ever asked. Yes. She wrapped her arms around me carefully, not tightly, not possessively, just enough for me to know she was real. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. When we finally sat on a nearby bench, she removed a worn envelope from her handbag. I've carried this everywhere. Inside were dozens of unopened birthday cards. Every envelope had my name written in neat handwriting. Every one had been returned. Across the front of each envelope, in my mother's handwriting, were the same 4 words. Return to sender. I counted them. 29 cards. One for every birthday I had ever celebrated. I mailed one every year, Margaret said quietly. I never stopped. My throat tightened. You remembered every birthday. I remembered the day you were born. She smiled sadly. I never accepted the date your mother gave you. She reached into her bag again. This time she removed a tiny knitted blanket. It was the first thing I made for you. The wool had faded with time, but every stitch remained perfect. I kept hoping one day I'd finally give it to you. I held it against my chest. You never had another child? She shook her head. No. Why? I already had one. Tears blurred my vision. I just wasn't allowed to raise her. Over the following weeks, our relationship grew naturally. There were no dramatic reunions, no perfect endings, just coffee shops, long walks, phone calls that lasted until midnight, stories about grandparents I had never known, photographs of my biological father, who had died in a workplace accident years earlier without ever learning where I was. For the first time in my life, I heard stories about my birth, my first laugh, my first cry, the tiny birthmark behind my shoulder that Margaret had kissed before they carried me away. Things only a mother could remember. Meanwhile, my own family slowly began to fall apart, not publicly, quietly, like old wallpaper finally peeling from damp walls. Chloe called several times. "I didn't know everything," she insisted, "but you knew enough." She cried. "I thought Mom was protecting everyone. So did Dad." Neither of them had realized that protecting a lie only makes it stronger. My father came to my apartment one rainy Thursday carrying an old cardboard box. I found these in the attic. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, not destroyed, hidden. There were pictures of me learning to ride a bicycle, blowing out birthday candles, holding school certificates, reading books beside Grandma Evelyn, pictures my mother had never displayed, pictures no one else had ever seen. I couldn't throw them away, Dad admitted. So I hid them. I looked through every photograph. For the first time, I saw proof that someone had quietly tried to preserve my childhood. It wasn't enough, but it mattered. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know." "No." He shook his head. "You deserved better than knowing." Then he cried. It was the first time I had ever seen my father cry. I hugged him. Not because everything was forgiven, but because healing begins long before forgiveness does. Grandma Evelyn passed away 6 months later. Before she died, she asked Margaret and me to visit together. She struggled to speak. "I thought I was saving everyone." Margaret held her hand. "You were trying." "I was wrong," Margaret nodded. "Yes." There was no shouting, no revenge, only truth. Sometimes truth hurts enough on its own. Grandma died 2 days later. The following Easter, Margaret invited me to her small cottage. There were only 5 of us: Margaret, me, my father, Miriam Hale, and Carol, Margaret's lifelong friend. No matching clothes, no professional photographer, no perfect decorations, just homemade food, laughter, and stories. Halfway through lunch, Miriam placed an old Polaroid camera on the table. One picture before dessert. We stood together beneath the apple tree. Margaret slipped her arm through mine. Dad stood beside us. The camera clicked. No one told anyone to move. No one stepped out of the frame. Everyone who belonged there remained exactly where they were. A week later, Margaret framed the photograph and handed it to me. On the back, she had written one sentence: "The first family photograph where nobody had to disappear for someone else to belong." Today, that picture hangs above my living room fireplace. People sometimes ask why it is my favorite photograph. I simply smile, because they cannot see what I see. They see 5 ordinary people standing beneath an apple tree. I see a mother who never stopped writing birthday cards, a father who finally chose truth over silence, a retired nurse who refused to forget, a family friend who protected a secret until it could heal instead of destroy, and a daughter who finally stopped waiting for someone else's permission to belong. I spent 29 years believing love meant earning a place inside someone else's picture. Now I know better. Real family never asks you to stand outside the frame. They make room before you even arrive.